Okay, are we good with recording?
We're good.
Great. Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our HSMAI March education event, Forecasting Amidst the Chaos. I'm Mari Cam. I am the current HSMAI Hawaii chapter president. And as always, I'm honored to welcome you to today's educational event. We're so happy to see so many of you who have been able to join us regularly for our education events. Our Hawaii chapter board of directors is committed to hosting a series of monthly events focused on providing insights and expertise for the hospitality industry. As those of you who are current members of HSMAI know, as a member, you gain access to our global and local network, weekly tools, insights and trends, as well as discipline specific education. So if you're not a member yet, and you are interested in becoming one, please reach out to us by email, which we have listed here, or even on here, if you want to drop something in the chat, any of the board members that are here today, you'll be able to see it in their name. So reach out to us and we'd be happy to help you. Before we begin today, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Jen's going to be answering questions throughout her presentation, so feel free, since everybody is muted, to just put your questions into the chat, and we will raise the questions for you, or Jen will actually even be monitoring the chat herself and be able to answer the questions as we go along. Also, the session, as you know, if you came in from the very beginning, is being recorded today, and it will be shared after the event ends. I want to start off with a big mahalo to our sponsor for today's meeting, Shiji Group. We're working really hard to continue to provide you with quality content that's free for our monthly events, and sponsors like Shiji Group allow us to do this. So I'd like to introduce Lori Block, who's the Director of Sales of Strategic Accounts, to share a few words about Shiji.
Hi, thank you so much, Mari, and everybody for having us today. Yeah, we're thrilled to be a sponsor of the HSMAI Hawaii meeting today. I've been with Shiji Group only for about 6 months, but I'm a veteran in the industry for the last 15 years. So I've been part of HSMAI for quite some time now. So I'm very excited to tell you a little bit about our company. Is everyone seeing my screen okay, hopefully? Yes?
Not yet.
Oh, you didn't? I did share screen. Sorry about that. Let's try this one more time. Sorry. Technical difficulties. That's weird. Well, if it doesn't show, I'm not sure why. It's showing on my side and I hit share screen. We practiced this before and it seemed to be fine.
Go ahead and try one more time.
All right, let me escape from here. Let's see. Yeah, I don't know why. So you guys still don't see it, huh? Can you make me presenter from your side, Mari?
Let me just see if I can, yeah. Okay, go ahead, try again.
All right, now do you see my full screen, hopefully? Yes, no?
No, I'm not seeing it.
That's very weird. Well, it just worked a few minutes ago. Well, that's okay. I will go ahead and just talk. I don't want to take the whole meeting trying to figure this out. But just a little bit of background about Shiji. Our company's been around over 20 years in the industry. And we've acquired several companies over the years to be able to really fill the gaps and voids within the hospitality industry. We started out as a reseller for Micros products and over time acquired several companies, including Infosys, our point of sale solution, as well as really helping, we know it's been a really hard time this past year for everybody. So we've acquired companies like the MyCheck solution, which helps with contactless payment options, also tying into our point of sale solution, as well as we have an enterprise property management solution that we've been building over the last 5 years. It's now live in Asia and in Europe, but not in the US until the end of this year. But if you're interested to learn more, happy to tell you about that. It'll be a great opportunity to connect all the hotel systems together. We do also have a company called Review Pro. You guys may have heard, that does online reputation management. And we work with Kalibri Labs, who's going to be presenting today as they provide the data that helps come into that solution for us. In addition to, like I said, in response to where the industry's at, we have a GEA, an AI-powered chatbot that helps with, the questions that come into the various hotel locations that they can then, accelerate to somebody else, or the chatbot can answer themselves. There's several other solutions that we offer too on the spa, golf, and membership side called Concept, you may have heard of. So really, again, we kind of end-to-end cover the suite of needs in the hospitality space, providing best of breed solutions. So if you're interested in learning more, I'm more than happy to take some time and walk you through those solutions that hopefully can help with both the, create additional efficiencies in light of today's circumstances, as well as some cost reductions by consolidating systems. So I know, sorry, I didn't have visuals for some reason. I don't know why that didn't work just now, but excited to be here and listen to what Jennifer has to tell us about forecasting for the industry. And thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Lori. I don't know what happened.
I'm
so
not sure. I hit
that.
share screen and it's showing share on my side. So,
we'll make sure everybody gets a copy of the deck as well.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that.
And I was going to say, also feel free to drop, if you have a preferred contact information into the chat, you can feel free to drop that in for everybody too right now.
Awesome. I will. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And Laura, if you'll send me that deck, I'll make sure it goes out with the recording.
Perfect. I'll do that. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker today, Jennifer Hill. Jennifer is the VP Client Solutions at Kalibri Labs, an award-winning hospitality revenue strategist and member of HSMAI's Revenue Optimization Advisory Board. Prior to joining Kalibri Labs in 2018, Jennifer held various regional revenue roles with third-party management companies like Interstate and Highgate. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. I am going to try sharing my screen because I'm going to be out of luck if we all would be out of luck if I couldn't share my screen. So I think I'm good, right?
Yeah, we got it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for having me join. Mari, thanks for that great introduction. Dan, for the opportunity. Julie, for setting everything up. And then everyone in the chapter is amazing. I'll tell you a little bit more about me in just a minute, but super happy to have a chance to chat with you. Thanks for spending part of your morning with me. And I'll dive right in. I also have a pretty long history with HSMAI. I'm on the board in Washington, D.C., even though I live in northern New Jersey now. We're still based as a company in the D.C. area, and I'm happy to support the chapter there. And I know of the Hawaii chapter through that partnership. And I also am on the Revenue Optimization Advisory Board. So doing a lot of these market meetings, and it's really exciting to hear about markets all over the country and how things are starting to recover. Sorry. I am a certified revenue nerd, so I officially am a CRME, but also just love the overall revenue management discipline, which of course is morphing into some commercial strategy, which I will share a little bit more about how we think of that at the end of the call. I am a lifelong hotelier. So while I have spent the past 3 years working at Kalibri Labs in the data analytics space, I have really worked in every position from part-time night audit to housekeeping to front office, rooms division, and then eventually revenue and distribution. And I want to give a plug here for HSMAI, just the certifications, CRME, CHDM. I know Dan has that certification. They are 20% off through, did I get that right? Through the end of March. I'm not asked to promote that, but I think they're really powerful certifications, and I always like to bring it up. And then I also like to share one of the superpowers that I leveled up my career with, which was studying improv. We all do improv every single day. Lori just nailed it when her screen wouldn't share, and she talked us through the amazing things that she and all of their companies and products do without the help of those visual aids. So I highly, highly recommend studying improv to get comfortable doing exactly what just happened. And there are some classes online through Improv Hawaii. So I hope that you'll take me up on that suggestion. So I'm going to lay a couple of ground rules for myself and share some information here. I always give a shout out to the leadership team. I think the Hawaii leadership team is so brilliant, been super great to work with, really appreciative of the opportunity to talk with you guys again. And then now to the rules. I am going to try to avoid saying COVID-19 for the remainder of the session. There's one exception later on, see if you can catch me in it. And I also definitely want to avoid the word unprecedented. We all know these things. We know how we got here, maybe not specifically, but we certainly know how the last 12 months have evolved for us. And I don't want to just keep harping on that. I'm going to share some historical trends, of course, but want to do so with the idea of how that information can help propel us and move us forward. And then there are some things that we don't know yet, but we certainly are getting closer. And during the sort of pre-call, I was glad to hear that, you know, trends are starting to pick up and pace is moving in terms of bookings on the islands, especially given, you know, sort of we're fully in spring break and heading into more weeks of that. So that's really great news. Glad to hear it. One of the questions we get asked a lot is sort of the exact length of the resulting economic slowdown that is upon us. We don't know. No one does, right? And then when consumer and traveler confidence will return after vaccines are widely distributed. You know, we're running about 2 months earlier than most assumptions. And Mari made the comment earlier in that pre-call too, you know, that when President Biden said by May 1, like things really started opening up and consumer confidence, I think overall for US travel at least is going to continue to increase. So with that said, I'm going to turn off my camera so you can focus on the things I'm going to show you. I will definitely keep an eye on the chat, but please feel free you know, to ping one of the board members if I miss your message. Happy to answer any questions throughout the call today. So I think a lot of you probably know who Kalibri Labs is as a company. You're certainly probably familiar with our thought leadership and our CEO and co-founder Cindy Estes Green. Many of you may not realize that we actually are also a company that has a product. We do next generation benchmarking using data science. This is also the data that powers all of our thought leadership and data for presentations like today. We do all of this work through our proprietary database that is updated on a weekly basis from over 35,000 hotels in the US. The data comes directly from the hotel brands themselves. So our data providers are the chains. And that means, and I'll talk a lot about this when we get to the Hawaii specific data, that we don't have full coverage on the islands. And I'll explain how we handle that when we get to those specific data points. But the data that we do collect is really granular because we're getting transaction records. So every day of every stay is coming into our database, and that allows us to pull a lot of really granular insights from that data. We track channel, rate category. We are really focused on length of stay, not that we can calculate it because everyone can, but that this is a really important metric to many, many markets right now. Yours not excluded from that. Excuse me. And loyalty contribution is also a really powerful differentiator for our data, and we will talk a little bit about that specifically today. And as a sort of quick refresher or update, if you're not familiar with Kalibri Labs, the biggest differentiator that our data set has over any other benchmarking data is that we collect acquisition cost data from our data providers. So this allows us to track things like loyalty investment, retail commissions, wholesale commissions, including OTA margins and markups, as well as channel costs and transaction fees. And we use those to calculate 3 different revenue types. And we're primarily going to focus on the most traditional or familiar metric that we calculate and work with, which is hotel collected revenue. So this is defined for us as straightforward as it sounds. This is what the hotel is collecting for the guest stay, whether it is directly from the guest or it's from a third party. This is what's reported on your financial statements in the hotels. This is also certainly what you're used to seeing represented in other benchmarking reports like the STAR report or STAR data. We're going to also focus on hotel collected revenue today, but I also want you to be thinking about a couple of other revenue types, even if you aren't working with us. This is something that you can be mindful of as you're looking toward recovery or sustained recovery and building back a business mix. Is when we start with hotel collected revenue, we do have the ability to gross it up. So those OTA margins and markups are added back in to calculate guest paid revenue. This is something that you can also think about. You generally know what your margins are, so you can kind of do math or actually physically track, what the guest is paying to stay in your hotel, whether it is directly to the hotel or through a third party. And then overall, think about what the commissions are and any other costs that you incur with the acquisition of that booking. We calculate a kind of net revenue metric called COPE revenue. COPE is an acronym. It stands for Contribution to Operating Profit and Expense. And sort of the Reader's Digest version of this is, what are we keeping of what the guest has paid? Because that is then what we can send along to help cover those operational costs at the bottom line. So again, we're going to focus on hotel collected revenue, but I wanted to share this with you just as you're thinking again about how recovery is going to look in your hotels. This is mostly a reference slide that will be included as part of the follow-up, because I know that we haven't presented to the Hawaii chapter before, and you may have seen presentations from STAR, from CBRE, even from TravelClick. And I wanted to just let you know kind of how our data points stack up so that you have a frame of reference. And then speaking of CBRE, if you are a user of those Hotel Horizons forecasts, we are the exclusive data provider for those. So that means that you already may have seen or have been using our data. So it's not completely brand new, definitely something that you might already be familiar with. Okay, now we're going to jump into the data. And I'm going to put you in the time machine and take you back a little over a year to 2019 so that I can set the stage a little bit about where we were when the pandemic hit. And I hope not to dwell too much on the past, but 2019 has quickly become our benchmark and baseline year. And I want to establish where we saw the industry performing before we start diving in specifically to the islands. This is an overview of total room revenue by our revenue types in 2019. So guest paid revenues up there at the top, $173 billion are what guests paid to stay in our hotels in the US in 2019. Hotel collected was $169 billion, so $4 billion kept at the third party level. That never hit our P&L statement. We were never really thinking too much about those acquisition costs. They're becoming more and more important these days, of course. And then you can start to see how that filters down to COPE revenue and another type of revenue that we do track at a nationwide level when we put in some assumptions about sales and marketing spend, and that is our net revenue number. The most important thing I want to share with you on this slide is a calculation that is very simple called revenue capture. So this is simply what we're keeping of what the guest is paid divided by what the guest has paid. So in 2019, we were 83.25%. It was down about 3 basis points year over year from the prior year. So why did I take you to the Wayback Machine? Why is this important? Because for 5 years, we experienced record increases in RevPAR and revenue. We all, I think, were starting to question where we could squeeze in any more occupancy, especially in high occupancy markets, and how we were going to drive rates up. And we, on the left, see that progression in hotel collected RevPAR from a little over $78 in 2015 to over $86 in 2019. What was happening on the back end of that, though, is because things were good, we weren't paying as much attention to acquisition costs, or essentially the cost of the sale, and we were losing money. We actually were keeping less of what the guest has paid year over year from 2015 to 2019. So we were heading into 2020, which in most markets was set up to be a pretty record-breaking year. And we were actually keeping less of what the guests had paid in more than 5 years. So we were already kind of teetering on in a tough spot when the pandemic hit. So I wanted to bring this up because, of course, now we have to be really cognizant of every room night that comes into the hotels and our resorts, not just because it means that we can have a chance at making debt service, or we can make sure that our team has enough hours to support their families, but we are even more concerned with the overall business mix and the profitability of that. So expanding and being creative about the way we think about our business mix is even more important. And I know that you guys have been doing this for 12 months already and counting. So, please know that I acknowledge that and respect it. And you have had maybe the toughest time overall because of the travel restrictions in and out of the state. Some of the next information I'm going to share with you is also just to set the stage as we get into your specific data. So again, Wayback Machine 2019, thinking about big picture and how every market kind of feeds off one another in terms of overall business mix. So in 2019, about 5 market segments made up almost 82% of our RevPAR. They were, probably no surprises, retail, group, corporate, OTA, and then promotion, which includes our loyalty member rates. So if you are a brand and you give a discount to your guests for being logged into their loyalty membership program, when they book, it gets tracked here under promotion. 1/3 of that is group and corporate. And we all know what happened to group and corporate. When we start looking at this by chain scale, the numbers are even more staggering, with group and corporate coming in at 45% of the luxury business mix, 46% of the upper upscale business mix, and back to the average of about 1/3 at the upscale level. And then it shrinks to 26% at the upper mid-scale chain scale.
Jennifer, we have a question.
Great.
The question is, how has the prevalence of vacation rental inventory and bookings impacted the data sets when doing like-for-like comparisons over time?
Great. Thank you so much for that question. We actually only are counting traditional hotel rooms, which I know is not necessarily the best and greatest data set for this particular audience. So I appreciate you sort of being willing to listen to the data that we have that is a little bit more traditional hotel focused. That is definitely an area of the database that will be expanding in the future. Like 2020 for everyone else, our plans for growth were a bit deferred and delayed. So that actually doesn't play a role here, which in terms of year-over-year comparison like for like is actually good news for the overall math. But I know that that might, mean that it's less meaningful for you overall. So thank you for that question. And thanks, Julie, for letting me know it was there. All right, so just a little bit more on total US before I put things in the context of the islands for you. So we track every week, it's updated on Tuesdays, data for total US and then hotel performance by market type, by rate category, and even down to the market and sub-market level for demand. We provide this as a community service to the industry, so you can access this anytime at kalibrilabs.com/industry health. You can sign up for updates so that every week when this is updated, you get an email saying, hey, go look at the fresh data. And there's a lot of really good information here, including this hotel performance. So total US occupancy, and then ADR year-over-year percent change. So ADR is our yellow line. The red line is occupancy, and it's the one below it. Just in case anyone is colorblind, I apologize. These aren't the most accessible colors, but we do see, common peaks and valleys in terms of occupancy and ADR. And overall, from an ADR perspective, I do want to share that we have experienced a decline, of course, but it's not driven necessarily by just everyone dropping rate. We have definitely experienced the greatest ADR change year over year because of the change in the mix of business. Group, corporate, incentive meetings definitely always carry a higher rate. So when we're working mostly with leisure demand, that rate has definitely declined. And also because we're, sort of working in strange times where demand is limited for certain weeks and certain days of the week, it definitely also has changed the overall ADR picture. So when we move a little bit further down on the industry health dashboard, we have the hotel performance by market type. And so the islands are considered resort destination, as you might have guessed. And you can change this to just see your data. So it's interactive. You can see the whole US, and then you can actually drill in to several hundred of our almost 1,000 submarkets that we include. And we redefined the map of the US with CBRE, and so that's why you see towns that you may not know. I actually just noticed that we track Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, which is my hometown. So we really go small because that town has 30,000 people in it in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. So we probably have data, if you are regional or you're working in other markets outside the islands, probably have data for you. And when we look at how all resorts and destinations are performing across the US, this is the overall rate category performance. And I do want to spend a bit of time here talking a little bit about this detail. So we have corporate, group, OTA, promotion/loyalty member rate, and rack bar rates that are specifically called out. Other is in this lighter blue line here, and those are all of our other rate segments that are rolled up into just sort of this group, right? Other, that's going to include AAA, advanced purchase, any senior discounts, government, rate, etc. I want to draw your attention, of course, to group, which we all know is kind of bottomed out. So this is for all resort destinations. Interestingly, corporate is kind of hanging out up here with the rest of our rate categories. Anecdotally, we believe that probably is because people who are still traveling might be taking advantage of some corporate rates that are still available because they're better, which is fair. We also highlight rack bar in the yellow line. Promotion/loyalty member rate is here in the green line, and then OTA is in the red line. And I'll highlight OTA specifically and take an opportunity to answer a question. Is there a drill down for local website or online direct versus OTA? Yes, we do provide that level of data. In the industry health dashboard, it is not specifically available, but it is available in our reporting. So I don't want to make this a commercial, but we can get down to that level. We can break it down to OTA type. So net merchant if the guest is paying in advance to the OTA, or retail if they're paying at the hotel, as well as opaque. And we can't see specifically if that's, some of the big guys like just Expedia or Booking.com, but you can generally make some assumptions about the type of business that those companies book, including all of their subsidiaries. And then from pretty much any other rate category specific, like we can see brand.com production for rack bar versus loyalty member versus corporate versus AAA, et cetera. So we do have that level of detail. And that allows us actually to highlight one of these trends that we've been seeing, not only in the resort destination market type, but also across the board in the US, no matter the market type, which is that these promotion or loyalty member rates are very successful. So there has never been a time before in our industry where that type of business has been able to keep pace or outpace OTA business, especially in a downturn. And I highlight OTA specifically just because that is a common question that we get, sort of OTA versus direct bookings. But I also will mention that it also is the first time we've seen it above rack bar on a consistent basis, above corporate on a consistent basis. So that is a meaningful area of focus for you as you're thinking about maintaining any momentum that you have going into some recovery. Okay, now I'm gonna pretend I've flown across the country and have joined you in Hawaii. So we track 2 submarkets. One we group together, so Maui, Hawaii, Kauai, and Lanai, and then Oahu separately. The top half of this graph is the submarket performance from April through June. So we do forecast performance as well. And then the bottom half of this view is actually the rate category performance for the submarkets combined. So just essentially the Hawaiian Islands. So we see rack bar up there, that yellow line, which is really strong. Again, our promotion / loyalty member rates, and then OTA, other corporate, and of course group kind of trailing the pack. So this is important because I just really want to focus on that opportunity that exists to market to guests who love your hotel because they are interested in that booking. They're available to you, of course, as you well know, in closed user groups, accessible maybe through a mobile app or through just even basic email marketing. So I've requested data for both of the submarkets that we cover on the islands. We're going to start with Oahu, and this is a specific it's actually more than year to date picture for all chain scales from the beginning of November to the beginning of March, which is the latest data that we have as of today. Tomorrow it will be a little newer. And we see similar color coding here. So our green line is that promotion / loyalty member rate. The red is OTA. The blue in this case is group. And then we have the pink rack bar line here showing up. So the islands, or Oahu specifically, trending the same way we find pretty much all US trending for all chain scales. When we come into the luxury chain scale, the picture changes a little bit. And so those other segments can also include FIT, wholesale contract business, which if I had to guess about that spike around the holidays, probably is driven by some of that type of business in that gray line, which is all other segments. And we still see in the luxury chain scale here, loyalty member rate fighting for a position with rack bar and OTA. I will tell you specifically for this submarket that varies from every other market that I've looked at. Typically, promotion is way down, like sort of loyalty member rate, much further down than both OTA and rack bar with the absence of group. So this is an interesting trend, specifically if you are a luxury property. This is the upper upscale view. So similarly here, we typically don't see the distribution falling this way. Again, absent group, absent corporate, we definitely have seen OTA make up for that, which is why they're such great partners for us, because they bring demands that we may not have otherwise had access to, but we also are experiencing really good loyalty member rate business here. Upscale, pretty similar story, a little bit higher group business here through January into mid-February. This definitely could have been pandemic related business, traveling nurses, if that has been something driving business. It could also just be traditional group if people are traveling maybe for one reason or another. This is our upper mid-scale view, which is not too dissimilar to what we look at in other markets and then total US. Definitely a very hot chain scale for those loyalty member rates and that type of business coming into the hotel. Also still very popular with OTA, of course, as well. So when we shift to the other islands that we're tracking, we start to see everything kind of compress. We still have quite a lot of other segments booking. Again, that can include AAA, advanced purchase, wholesale, corporate in this particular view. And then trading very closely together. What do we see? Loyalty member rates. And again, I have to say that out of all of the markets I've reviewed, this has definitely been the strongest performance, even though we're seeing record-breaking performance in that particular segment of business across the board. In this luxury set, a slightly different picture where everything is much closer together. And then we see some different peaks and valleys in January for probably what is that wholesale business and group. And this can definitely just depend on how a particular hotel or how a particular chain managed that piece of business and how they coded it. So we're getting those reservation records, and it is always whatever is on the checkout record is what we receive. So if it was miscoded, or if we didn't end up, if they didn't end up in the right segmentation in the property's PMS, we would report it this way. And so sometimes when you see those peaks and valleys, that's what that indicates. And then upper upscale, not dissimilar from what we experienced or saw in Oahu over the past 5 months. Here's our upscale view. And then upper mid-scale. Not a lot of group to talk about here. Everything else fighting for position. Rack bar really starting to see a trail off, which is unusual. So I would suggest, sort of if that is an area that was performing well for your specific upper mid-scale hotel in these locations, check out what's going on. Kind of is if there was a trend to increase the discount for those loyalty member rates, that might explain it. It might just be a shift seasonality wise that I may not be aware of, not being an expert specifically in that market. And I think Mari led off with this, but just so you know, this deck is available to you as part of the follow-up. So I hope you haven't been frantically taking notes unless that's just how you learn. But if you feel like this, don't worry, sometimes I do too. This is one of my favorite slides to include in any presentation because we have a lot of data. There are a lot of data points, and then I tend to talk fast. So I'm glad that this is being recorded and you can revisit it because I have more data for you. But I first want to tell you a little bit about how we come to the next data points. And any thought leadership that we do that now includes future-looking data is based on our predictive model. So we, over the past 3 years, have had a really big effort on our data science team. I like to call them the brain trust, to build out a predictive model that can effectively become a hotel's forecast or for a submarket or even a market level forecast. And this is for all of our market specific thought leadership or anything that we publish on the US, the same predictive model. So we just either look at it as a whole, an aggregate across all of the hotels in our database, or we drill down to a particular submarket or even individual hotel, but it's all served by the same model. And that model has 3 key components. The first is our weekly performance data. So like most of your revenue management systems, if you're a hotel, this is going to behave similarly, and that it is, of course, going to consider the past history for a particular hotel or submarket. We actually look at 3 years worth of history for trends by rate category and channel, lead time and length of stay, day of week, for both room nights and ADR. And there is more weight or value, statistically speaking, given to the most recent 90 days of history. This specifically was built in, of course, for seasonality more than it was to accommodate for any type of situation that we're currently in, but it has come in handy to accommodate the sort of month over month view of this forecast over the past year. We also pull in some macroeconomic factors from CBRE forecasts by market. So that is a benefit of our partnership with them. And we have something that I have to break my rule for and have sort of artificially depressed the forecast with what we call the COVID overlay. It wasn't a super creative name, but it does include things like rate of transmission. And it did include an assumption that by the end of Q2 2021, vaccines would be widely available and in use. So I think I started off sort of some of this conversation or shared pre-call that we sort of are, or not sort of, we are definitely trending ahead of that, right? So in our assumption, that was June of 2021. By most accounts, including President Biden's, we're probably going to be around May 1 for a pretty hefty portion of the population being vaccinated and ready to travel. That is something that is included at this market level. And lastly, in terms of future data, you might be wondering about that. We do daily rate shops for all of the hotels in our database for the next 90 days for 5 major rate categories and for brand.com and OTA. And that is with the help of a third-party partner. And we use that as the primary proxy for demand. So it is important to note that, we're not looking just or at committed occupancy on the books. We shop every hotel for more than 90 days out once a week, and that's of course on a rolling basis. We also are applying a factor of our ratio of cancellations because of course we all know that that number was on the rise to begin with. Then, we certainly have seen more flexible cancellation policies being required now, and I would expect that trend to continue. And in the future, we'll be incorporating consumer review scores, reservations, and group blocks on the books. And the consumer review score is such an important note. We actually do partner with Review Pro for that specifically because the data is so rich. But it's really helpful to us to incorporate that because it's just such a good way to understand how a hotel is positioned in the market from a reputation perspective, not only just managing, but then marketing, because that has a huge billboard effect. I know for the most part, that has generally been disproven, but I think we would all agree that as individual consumers, we definitely count on that. So that is going to be incorporated as part of our data science into this future forecast, so that as a hotel nears a time where it needs to be renovated, we might project lower occupancies or lower rates. And that is an upgrade that will come to this algorithm in the future. So I wanted to explain the data that I'm going to show you because we treat it much differently. It comes from this predictive model. And then certainly anytime I find attendees excited about a Kalibri Labs call, it's usually probably because they're data nerds too. So I hope that that all worked well for you in terms of explanation. So the forecast projection that I'm going to show you, starting with Oahu, is going to be year-over-year percent change. So I'm going to be really kind of clear about that. We're going to first look at this year-over-year occupancy percent change. So this is from 2015 forward. So 2015 shows us flat because that's our first year of tracking. And then we kind of have this generally flat performance until we get to 2019, and then it plummets. We all know why. And we expect it to jump back up pretty high on Oahu in 2021. And then it is important to note that for 2022, this is a partial year. It is through June of 2022. So if you're like, oh my God, what are you guys saying is going to happen in 2022? It's just because we're looking at a half year here. So I'll repeat that because I think it's important. Not only are we just looking at the percent change for these particular metrics, but 2022 is just a partial year. So if the numbers seem like they go back down, it's because we're looking just at the first 6 months. But we have the ability to show that to you, and I'll show it to you by month in a little while. And I wanted just to include that because I think it's a nice bonus to have. This is the hotel collected ADR percent change. So this market, or submarket rather, has done a really exceptional job in kind of managing rates. I know sometimes in market it may not feel that way. But this is definitely one of the better performances in terms of percent change versus the prior year that we've seen anywhere. So congratulations. Again, I know sometimes it may not feel that way, but the rates are really good, relatively speaking. And then this is the hotel collected RevPAR performance, the percent change. These dips and rebounds definitely created mostly by occupancy declines and then recovering some of that occupancy. And then in 22, we see a little bit of a different pattern here than we did for occupancy in 2022, because we also will start to experience some rate lift in the first half of 2022. This is 2021 by month, big percentages. One of the things I usually share before now is that I build all my own decks, so all errors and omissions are mine. But I looked at this 4 different times because I was just like, I need to make sure this is right. The data was right, the chart was right. So they are marked. If you have any trouble reading them, the ones that kind of got stuck down here in the labels, please let me know. I'll be happy to send you the actual numbers. So this is the monthly occupancy percent change for year over year, so versus 2020. Hotel collected ADR, and then kind of everybody's big question is always RevPAR, because of course it ties back to our revenues. So this is the hotel collected RevPAR percent change. Again, keeping in mind, we do not have full coverage in the hotels, but we have a large enough sample, plenty of hotels that we can present data. But I do want to just make sure sort of that I repeat that as well, because I don't want to be too overt and saying every hotel should follow this guidance, because if you're not included in the database, it might be a little bit different for you. And that's really why I focused so much earlier on the chain scale data, because it is important to really be able to understand that from a chain scale perspective, because that usually in almost all cases carries over. And that's how companies like ours and others work with estimation data. Okay, so moving to our other islands, these patterns were not surprisingly pretty similar in terms of that occupancy percent change. So, you know, we have kind of this flat performance and then the big dip and the jump back up, a little bit slower from our latest projection here for this group of islands in the submarket. And then this submarket also experienced a little bit of a different pattern in terms of hotel collected ADR. Again, with 2022 being a partial year. And this is definitely related to chain scale in this submarket, just because there are not quite as many, at least in the database we have, hotels at those upper tier chain scales. RevPAR, similar pattern. And then we have our month by month forecast. Again, I double checked our percentages and the graphs. And this is our RevPAR. Great. So we have the 2022 first half. Again, this is going to be the percent change versus 2021. I put a disclaimer on the bottom here, preliminary, likely and subject to change, because it is definitely going to. We are expecting that the next prediction run, the model will have more optimism in occupancy. So this is, as it says, preliminary. It's a nice preview. And then of course, all of the percentages drop, because as we get better in performance in 2021, there's not going to be so much of a, you know, sort of this exponential growth year over year in 2022. So in Oahu, we see kind of this drill down, and this is occupancy and RevPAR side by side. And then for the other submarket here, both occupancy percent change and RevPAR. I think one of the biggest questions or most common questions that we're getting or have gotten over the past year is kind of how do we tie this back? It's different. We all know that. You know, I'm not going to tell you guys anything you don't already know probably here, but I will just really emphasize, if you remember anything today, and this is coming up in conversations, it actually took a full decade to get us back to the height of 2008, 2009 ADRs. And that happened in 2019. If you remember, sort of 25 minutes ago, I was telling you, even though RevPAR was growing, ADR was growing in 2019, we were keeping less of it than ever. But it still had taken us 10 years to get back to that point. So if you absolutely have no choice, you have to do what's best for your business. And if that means you have to drop rate a little bit to match the market, to steal some of the little demand there is, do what you have to do, but keep in mind that it's going to take a while to come back. So if you can hold on, keep trying to hold on. You can absolutely be proactive over your demand. Remember some of those trends I shared with you about the loyalty member rate, the brand supported programs. Even if you are kind of a regional brand, definitely still take advantage of those trends. I'm sure that is maybe even heightened in markets like yours. So that's really, really key. I know you have great leadership from a digital marketing perspective just in the chapter. I'm sure that's true just overall in the industry there. This data can help support the decisions that are being made in those areas. Of course, direct business continues to be something that, everyone should look to pursue just because it is more profitable. We all know that, understand it. The net ADR advantage can actually be like between $10 and $12 per room night. So that is meaningful, and it has only increased over the past year. And then anything that you can do from a contactless perspective, when I was listening to Lori earlier, I was thinking about their MyCheck solution and how brilliant it is. And I remember even pre-pandemic, like some of the last times I went out to eat while I was traveling, like having that option already and thinking, oh, this is so revolutionary, but who's going to implement this in every restaurant? I'm like, little did I know that was going to be so important. But mobile apps that enable that are super important. They create a bias toward the brand, toward the hotel, toward direct bookings, because people just have gotten used to it now. It's a huge convenience. Think about, when Starbucks rolled out mobile ordering, you never have to talk to somebody at 5 o'clock in the morning again if you don't want to. And then it is absolutely true and worth repeating, consumers like the loyalty member rate options. They like things that are just for them, even if they're also just for their other million members, because it makes you feel special. And I think everybody, especially right now, is craving that a little bit. And we have a couple of slides here that include some questions or things to think about, so that as you share this deck, as you share this data with your teams, and you're planning for the remainder of 2021, really thinking about that sustained recovery ramp up into 2022, you can get some ideas hopefully flowing, or you might return to something that you've talked about in the past and maybe didn't follow up on, or it wasn't the right time in the recovery curve. And we've also included some information about how we think of commercial strategy, which I think overall is an industry we're moving toward. And this is definitely just, again, something to be thinking about as you plan for the months and the years ahead, hopefully with much, much brighter futures out there. No major changes are on the path that we're on to get back to whatever our new normal looks like. So again, I invite you to sign up for those updates to get the industry health dashboard refreshes delivered to your inbox every Tuesday. We also are running every 2 weeks, essentially the release of a white paper by market. I don't think Hawaii is on our upcoming list, but I certainly can put a request in. And probably most importantly, if you want to reach out to me to clarify anything I've shared today or to get more information, please feel free to reach out. My email is right here, and then I will also drop it in the chat just in case you want to copy and paste it there, and everyone will have it on the recording. So with that, I'll invite any other questions that have come in.
Hey, Jennifer, this is Dan. I have a question. I guess one comment first. Anybody who's working now in 2020, looks like you're going to be able to claim that you oversaw 700% growth on a year-over-year basis. So it's a pretty impressive stats there.
Put that in your incentive.
Look,
right?
I mean, from the data that you shared, the loyalty rates really seem to be killing it. And I have maybe a couple of questions on that. One is, what have you seen? And that's like a pure numbers thing, right? But what have you seen from a best practices approach in terms of getting those loyalty rates out there? And then the other question is related to COPE, and this is when you pull out the costs. When you look at it from a COPE perspective, how much more valuable is it than an OTA booking?
So I'll answer the second question first, and it is going to sound like a cop-out. It completely depends on the market and the asset, because everybody has slightly different commission costs. The difference on average across the US is between $8 and $10 pre-pandemic. That has widened pretty significantly, but it depends on the market over the past 12 months. So urban markets that have been most impacted by the loss of corporate and group business are experiencing sort of bigger jumps. People also are spending a lot more money in promotions, travel ads, and forgive me, it's been 3 years since I worked with any of these lives, so if the names have changed, just, I'm old, it's fine. But accelerator programs, definitely take more cost, but you also are jockeying for position in a saturated market, right? It's definitely changed the game in terms of those types of costs. So urban markets, in addition to just suffering sort of the greatest losses, also are fighting the hardest in terms of those costs. But it is double digits for sure. And the loyalty booking sort of best practices, I think, there are many. It depends on the brand. It depends also on the market. But I think the mistake that I see people make the most, that I would caution against, is assuming that you're only competing against your other similarly branded competitors from the same chain, for example. We often have to sort of combat the idea or the maybe misconception that if you are a Marriott Bonvoy guest, you won't consider Hilton Honors. But if you think about it yourselves as industry professionals, about the number of loyalty programs you belong to, you likely shop all of them. And it's important to understand that from a competitive intelligence or competitive inspiration standpoint. Like, don't just look at other Bonvoy programs, don't just look at other Hilton Honors programs, but look at what your other competitors are doing. And if you have small chains or independent hotels in your market, take a look and see what they're doing. It might not be loyalty specific, but it could be something for return or repeat guests, especially in your market. That's going to be a hugely valuable area of interest. And the other big thing I would say is if people are promoting a little bit differently for mobile bookings or mobile access, anything that kind of would maybe flip the switch on them booking between one hotel or another. And then if I might, just while I'm finishing up that thought, this isn't so specific to loyalty, but just generally, I have absolutely no idea if I can come from New Jersey right now to Hawaii, and if I was doing some inspirational shopping, make it super clear right now where your state is in terms of restrictions, right? Can I get there? What are the rules? I think, the airlines definitely are doing that. I'm sure that in some cases hotels are doing that, but if you are not keeping it top of mind or super visible, make it easy, especially if it's confusing. I was talking to a hotel in California. There's actually a portfolio of hotels, and I'm like, they moved to the red tier. Red is bad to me, but it actually was moving up. It was actually getting better. Things were loosening up a little bit. And I'm like, if you don't explain that to me, I don't know. And maybe if I have a different option to go somewhere else, I might choose that if it's easier for me to understand how easy it is for me once I get there. What are the rules? What do I need to bring with me? What do I need to be prepared for in terms of making reservations because outdoor seating is limited or whatever the case may be. So, outside of loyalty specific things, that would be kind of my number one best practice, is don't assume that everybody has the same information about your state that you do.
That's great. Thank you.
Of course.
Mari?
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, that's so much great information that you presented us today. We really appreciate your time. I mean, To me, I think it's nice to hear that the forecasts are picking up and looking pretty good for 2021 and 2022. I think one of our last revenue meetings that we had mid to late last year, they were forecasting that we weren't going to see a really strong pickup until 2024. So which is
so we advanced it. I'm not, because it's definitely occupancy driven, but this has happened just in the span of 2 weeks. So our predictive model runs every 2 weeks, and so those trends that are happening, that business that's coming in now is impacting the future. So if it starts to slow down again, we may start to see the future forecast slow as well, and that's important to keep in mind, that it's not quite yet sustained. But I definitely think that it's going to be more accelerated than where we were at the end of the year.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you heard me say it at the beginning, beginning of our call, is, everybody's looking towards spring break and everything's starting to pick up again, which is wonderful. So hopefully we continue on that trend. But just as we're coming to a close, I just want to thank you again so much for your time and sharing your expertise with us today. Really excellent presentation. I hope that next time we can actually invite you to the islands. We'll have a Mai Tai while you present, maybe, or something like that. We'll make it really nice and enjoyable for you. And thank you everyone else for joining us today. We hope you found today's session with Jennifer valuable, and that you'll join us again in April for our next event. We will be welcoming Michelle Green, who is the Global Business Lead for the Travel and Hospitality sector from Google. Also, I wanted to just let everybody know our annual golf tournament, we are hoping to have it in July. We're really looking forward to the opportunity to see everyone together again in person, while also raising money for the Hawaii Food Bank. So stay tuned for more information on that. And with that brings our meeting today to a close. Thank you again to everybody for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks.